supply chain. Today I have two goals. One, I'd like to define what the digital supply chain is, at least a working definition, and my second is to start a conversation because I think it matters. We are surrounded by all of these great technologies and, we're faced with how do supply chains evolve, and people are questioning how do they use these new forms of data, new technologies, and new signals in the evolution of the supply chain. Today I have three wonderful experts to join me in the conversation. First of all, Mark Brown. I consider Mark to be a leader in supply chain. When I was at AMR Research and I had questions about the next evolution of supply chain processes, I always enjoyed calling Mark and asking him his opinion. So Mark, welcome. And then we're joined by Karen Conway. Karen is an industry expert in the hospital, supply chain, healthcare. She does a lot of work with medical device companies, and she's a director at GHX. Karen, welcome to our conference today.
Thank you so much, Laura.
And Carol Hom is a long-term friend, and Carol's worked in several industries. She's currently at Logitech, and Logitech has been doing some interesting work in 3D printing, and I asked Carol to join us today from the high-tech industry. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks, Laura.
So as we go along, we're going to ask the industry experts to give us some insights about how digital technologies can help today's supply chain. As we look at the recent research on the supply chain today, we find that 1 in 2 people say there's a room for a lot of improvement. It's cautious, it's reactive, it's traditional, it's inside out. And what people are looking at is how do they break the cycles, and how do they have supply chains that are not as big of a risk factor in today's world? Because as we look at increasing demand volatility and supplier volatility, we fix the old problems of supply chain visibility, but we have increasing problems around regulatory compliance and operations complexity that have risen primarily through, the rise of product complexity. And so in our research, we find that 9 out of 10 companies are stuck at the intersection of operating margin and inventory turns. They can't get to their data, and they're struggling with how do I have my executive team embrace new concepts. So when we look at the evolution of these processes, we've got a coalescence of different technologies. We have the Internet of Things, which allow equipment to continuously transmit, our sensors. We've got the rise of mobility. We've got social and unstructured data that surrounds us with social. We've got digital images. We've got a resurgence of e-commerce. Companies now can directly sell to their customers. We have a waft of new business entries around business-to-business e-commerce. We have canonical integration happening on business-to-business networks and a redefinition of business networks, cloud computing, cognitive learning. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that as we enter into this new world, that we're just not automating our old processes and putting things in the cloud, but instead we're thinking about how we listen and how we test and learn and how we can use new forms of telematics to be able to look at where are trucks on the road and how can we fuel the collaborative economy. And today we're going to talk about the evolution of 4 different processes: digital manufacturing, using the Internet of Things, cognitive learning, digital path to purchase, which is automating the 4 moments of truth in the consumer cycle, 3D printing, and how we can use printers to be able to print things at the long tail of the supply chain, and the evolution of business-to-business networks. So as I think about the digital supply chain, I think about all of these technologies coming together to really redefine processes. And it isn't just about one of them in my mind. Instead, I think it's about all of them together. But when we have the workforce, right, we've got people at very different levels, right? We've got the digital natives that look at social and say, where would I be without it? And we've got the immigrants who say, I use it, but I'm really timid. But, you know, I've got those holdouts and the digitally disengaged, and they typically are the folks that are on the executive committee that may not understand supply chain, much less digital. And they're really questioning, like, is this for supply chain? You know, I've invested in ERP and MRP and DRP. Isn't this stuff for my kids? Or often I'll see people remark, well, yeah, we do social, but it's in the marketing department. And they'll say, well, digital printing is pretty cool, but, you know, what does it mean for me? And isn't it really just an experiential thing? So let me ask my panelists. You know, when you look at that group, Mark, which one are you, and what insights can you add about how you bring those groups together?
Well, which one am I? Can you go back a slide?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh. Let's go back a slide. Okay. So are you a native or an immigrant or a holdout?
I'm an immigrant. I'm too old to be a native. Okay. It wasn't invented it wasn't invented then, so I don't know that I could ever be a native. I would say I'm an immigrant, and the way I think about this space is, frankly, that you need to make the topic more about corporate culture than the individuals in the workforce. It's something that needs to be forced and accepted, and my experience is people will jump on board, even the seemingly digitally disengaged. In most cases, what we found is that that's a defense mechanism. When somebody appears to be digitally disengaged, it's a fear factor. And what needs to be done is to provide opportunities for those people to get more comfortable, and pretty quickly they'll become immigrants. That's my experience.
So Mark, any insights there? I mean, you were a CIO, you did a lot of work around helping people to become not, you know, disengaged. Any insights about how you break down those walls?
I think you find digital, I don't know what you call it, add-ons to form factors that people are already used to. So things like integration of a voice and email, little things to start with, or the ability to do things on your cell phone that you used to do on your computer. Because even the digitally disengaged use a computer. I mean, we're past that at this point. So what I found to be most successful is finding form factors that people are already comfortable with, and then move that form factor into the digital world, and the people will move with it.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Carol, how about yourself? You know, where are you on this continuum, and what have you learned about the workforce and acceptance of digital technologies?
So I came into it as a digital immigrant. I'm surrounded by digital natives, mostly because of the industry that I'm in currently. Geographically, we're surrounded by tech, both in Switzerland and in the Silicon Valley. So we're probably not at the very front of the pack, but we're right close behind it. And I'd say it is not generational within our company. It's very much the company culture that we're interested in anything that we can get our hands on so that we can try and understand how we can actually attach to it, since it kind of fits our product profiles. And it's very much a part of our everyday business. Don't think there's any resistance, or you really wouldn't be in the type of company that we are.
Karen, how about yourself? Any insights here?
Well, I would probably say I, too, am a digital immigrant. It depends on, you know, which of the categories. I want to absolutely agree with Mark in terms of, you know, some of these things are not that different. They're just a better way or a more exciting way. So I was a journalist for many years, and so I look at things like the social media, and to me, it's just a different channel. You know, it's like you had print, you had broadcast. This is just a different channel to share information. In the healthcare space, one of the biggest challenges I think we have, I personally think everything should be in the cloud, and there's tremendous opportunities. But in healthcare, we have this sense that we just don't want to share data.
I mean, there are still many, many doctors who still think that the patient's record belongs to them and not to the patient. I mean, think about how hard it is to get a copy of your own medical record when you're changing doctors. And what I tell folks is, if we're really going to understand what drives better quality care at a more affordable cost across the continuum of care, we've got to be able to share this information. And more data breaches happen when a laptop walks out of a hospital than when data is put in a cloud. Let the experts handle this, and we can create those partitions. We can create that privacy. But we've got to start understanding how important it is for us to be able to share this information to make better decisions.
So Karen, when you look at the definition of the digital supply chain that I have on the screen right now, what technology excites you the most?
I would say, I think probably the collaborative economy. It might be, or that opportunity to collaborate. I think of the story of some gamers who were able to solve a problem related to protein folding and help researchers. They had been working on a problem related to HIV and AIDS for 10 years, and gamers were able to solve that problem in 6 months. They just put it out there, and the world got involved. You know, people from 14 years old to 80 years old getting involved. I think we can solve this healthcare crisis. There are so many other opportunities here, certainly with 3D printing, certainly with being able to hold all of this data that we're gathering from different places. But I tend to think we can solve the healthcare crisis through collaboration and sharing of information.
Mark, how about yourself? What excites you on this chart?
I think I'm all about mobile right now. I know it's a little bit of a fad and fashion to say that, but all of the really exciting things that I've been faced with in the recent past have had a piece of mobile in them. The ability to go omni-channel, to merge activities that are happening at disparate locations and to do it in real time, to layer that on top of analytics and other kinds of information and deliver it to a salesperson out in the field or a manufacturing, a manufacturing person in a field, a different kind of field, a tomato field. To me, mobile opens so many doors and takes a supply chain which has historically been very geographically fixed and physical and extended, and merges it and makes it much, much more of a network.
Carol, how about yourself? What excites you about technology evolution here?
Right now we're working a lot with the social and unstructured data and trying to understand what that means to us in terms of supply chain planning, understanding signals earlier, trying to make sure that we mitigate risk earlier in our product lines. We don't quite know what we're dealing with yet, which makes it kind of exciting because we're testing and learning as we go.
And so what form of unstructured data are you looking at, Carol? Can you share?
Well, we always look at the social media data that we can get our hands on. It's not as consistent as we'd like it to be, but we're pretty much touching any place that we can touch. So because we tend to be an online kind of product as well as brick and mortar, there is a lot of feedback that's available to us that we're constantly calling through, trying to understand, are we picking up a signal quick enough? We're also looking at trending in terms of how products get into market, what the acceptance is. One of the things that is helping us with social and the unstructured data part, and when I say helping us, our world has changed. We can't release a product in one place and then slowly kind of release it globally. We go for global launches because that's what our consumers expect now. So the unstructured data actually can give us some really good signals about whether or not we've been successful in getting into a market and whether or not we have consumer acceptance.
And your product life cycles are so short that would just seem to have so much value.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple things. One is the product life cycles are short, and the other part is our lead times are very long. So we're constantly trying to figure out how do we get the right product out at the right quantity before we make a decision about whether or not we've got a product that's going to fly for a longer period of time. So we're trying to read it on both ends.
Excellent. Regina, let's do our polling question. Let's find out how many people in the audience are executing a digital supply chain as we move on. If you can just take a minute and answer the poll, are you currently working on a digital supply chain strategy? Just let us know yes or no. And then as we move along, we'll ask you which technologies excite you. So if you can just spend a minute to answer the poll, you can see in the window the change. So let's continue. So we've got different people at different points. Mark, let's explore the digital path to purchase. You know, you've worked a long time in consumer packaged goods. The digital path to purchase, which is the automation of the 4 moments of truth in the purchase cycle through the use of social, mobile, digital, and analytics technologies, to really be able to look at the list and how we make it digital and change the kitchen table so that we get the product on the list, to be able to look at QR codes and shelf sensing and in-store couponing, IP addresses and sensing and localized assortment, and then to be able to look at checkouts and usage, and to be able to look at how the digital affects this. In our research, we see that 63% of consumer packaged goods companies and food and beverage are working on the digital path to purchase, and we're also seeing the shift in spending away from more traditional types of scenarios like price and promotion into digital, which is the first time we've seen it in our survey. And, you know, here's just an example of Anheuser-Busch that snaps the code on the aisle and asks people to do the bud hunting with them, to be able to say, I've got a space in the beer aisle, but I've got none of my bud, and so they snap it, and when they do, it lets Anheuser-Busch know that they've got an out of stock, and they have this group called Bud Hunters that they get through social, and they get a coupon that actually upsells them for the brand, and then it also sends a signal to the retailer that says, you've got an out of stock at your store, which is an example of digital path to purchase. But in addition, we've got a lot of work going on with Amazon, and people are starting to sell directly on digital path to purchase to Amazon and test and learn, because as we know, we can read demand signals through e-commerce in hours, whereas when we translate demand from the retail store, it's in days. And we can connect customers through social, like Carol's saying, and we can connect not only the social graph, but also the interest graph to be able to drive information from our many sites, Facebook sites and Twitter sites, into things like demand signals through the use of emoticons that allow us to say what products should we have in our line, but also to be able to listen to customers. So this is an example of Newell Rubbermaid listening to sentiment about a customer that was so disappointed in their product launch, and they actually were able at Newell Rubbermaid to use this information because they meet weekly to review social signals, and they were able to look at this new product launch where a customer was so disappointed in the product saver, and they launched a whole campaign to be able to drive a usage guide so that they could save the product. Mark, what do you think? You know, digital path to purchase, you know, CIO and consumer products. What does this mean for you?
Well, I think it means a couple things. I think first, the big challenge. The big challenge is right now that we've got retailers who are somewhat under siege, particularly if they've got a huge investment in brick and mortar. And their systems may not be that modern, and they've got a lot of hurdles to get over. So what you're faced with is typically you have to pick one piece of that supply chain to hit hard and make improvements in and start to prove the model out. While you showed it as a very continuous supply chain, it's actually probably not that continuous when it comes to a digital path. Now, having said that, what I am seeing is I'm seeing on the front end this concept of list and basket starting to merge. You're starting to see use of things like expert assistant capabilities to drive informed direction to that consumer so that you're influencing what gets on that list at the time that that list is becoming an actual basket, which to me is very interesting because that's the holy grail is can you influence that list and the basket at the same time and do it dynamically. And you're seeing it with things like scanning right there in the aisle, and you saw the example, the Anheuser-Busch example. The second is you can also merge that with service, product service. So it can be information about the products, but even more so, it can be intelligent information about the products that speaks to some knowledge about that consumer. So if you can use tools like iBeacons and things like that, you can actually identify who is that consumer, where else do I know that consumer from, what else has that consumer bought from us in the past, what else have they asked us about in the past, and how can we proactively provide support for the product as well as for their shopping experience. On the other side of that, that can also affect how the retailer runs their store. So store-specific analytics can speak to who's shopping where, what is their shopping pattern, how are they behaving, and what might I want to do even with applying my staff to that situation. So if I'm a clothing retailer and I can see that a certain consumer has been in a particular department, maybe looking at jeans for an exceptionally long period of time, I can direct a sales employee to go out there and help and have some awareness of what's going on. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing that are pretty exciting. If I put a wrapper on it, though, the key is to figure out how does it fit with brand identity and intent. So what is the strategy of the retailer? What is the strategy of the consumer products provider? And how does that technology best support that brand intent?
And, you know, Mark, you used the term iBeacon. People may not know what that means. Can you just explain the definition of iBeacon? Now
you're testing me as a non-native. An iBeacon, it looks like a little stone. And essentially what it is you can put it anywhere you want, and it is constantly trolling the airwaves around it for cell phones that may be going by and would make, I think they're Bluetooth connections. And you can essentially, if the cell phone user is on your app, that's the ideal because then you know exactly who they are. But there are other means to identify that person based on prior behaviors. So what it gives you is it gives you a pretty accurate picture that is real time of who's in the area, what might they be doing, and you can then use that to reach out to them proactively. So for instance, you can, if it's, let's say they're in the Gap and they're shopping and they're in the long sleeve t-shirt section, and you know that because they walked by the iBeacon with their cell phone, you can send a message to that individual on their cell phone that says, hey, I noticed you're here. Did you see the sale on the short sleeve t-shirts that are next door that have the same exciting patterns? Things like that. Does that make sense?
And Carol, how about yourself? Any work going on at Logitech in this area?
There is. So just to build on what Mark's saying, I mean, the whole idea is to establish a relationship with your consumer that your consumer is going to value. And some of the ways that it has impacted us is in our product design. So not just give the consumer a product that satisfies their immediate need, but try and anticipate how to build a relationship with them for their future needs. An example of that would be a mobility speaker that it's a Bluetooth connected speaker that we marketed last year that we offered updates on and we were getting feedback through social media about what else people could do with the speaker, and then we would push down some additional capabilities and features to people that we already knew owned the speakers. But it was the same idea of how do you establish a meaningful relationship with the consumer so that they look at you not just as a provider of an item, but as a provider of the type of brand that they would want to buy long term.
So, guys, how do you go about this? You know, Mark, is this somebody in marketing? Is this enlightened CIO like yourself? Or Carol, is this somebody in supply chain? How do you go about this?
I'm going to let Carol go first.
Oh, okay. I was just going to do the same. So for us, it's been a lot of cross-functional teams. So we have business groups organized where we sit down and talk about what the challenges are and what we're trying to accomplish. There's certainly a piece that everybody owns. For supply chain, a lot of it has to do with how do we execute against the plans that the business group is putting out there. So if they want to be able to reach the consumer through engraving a product, then we need to be able to build a capability quickly that's going to be able to meet that need. So we're doing a lot of, I would say, sort of short cycle work where we're trying to be flexible and agile in giving more of a consumer focused solution that's coming out of supply chain. An awful lot of it really gets pushed back up into design. So if it's not kind of as part of product design to begin with, it's difficult to execute. But we're involved in it all the way through with supply chain, which is pretty exciting because we're finding ourselves much closer to the consumer and much more a part of the total business cycle than we have been in the past.
Yeah, we're seeing similar activity. The thing that's interesting about it to me is a lot more of it is rooted in customer profiling and what have traditionally been marketing activities where IT and operations have been included even at the very, very front end, which is pretty exciting. And so that is then supplemented by, and I wouldn't say we've hit gold yet, but we're trying very hard to change behaviors to be much, much more entrepreneurial. And what I mean by that is thinking in terms of minimum viable products for these capabilities as opposed to building for the industrial strength long-term solution. So can we create some kind of minimum viable capability, put it out there for some or all of our constituency, and learn from there and grow? One of the things we've noticed is that with the digital supply chain and these digital technologies, end users, experiencers, customers are a lot more willing to accept things that may not be dead on in their first iteration. They'd rather try something new, be a part of it, and I think that whole orientation is something you can really capitalize on.
Yeah, Laura, I could offer you some thoughts as well in terms of the healthcare, because I think you're starting to see this digital path to purchase more and more.
Okay.
You know,
Tell me about it.
Very traditionally, it has been more in the hospital trying to get the requisitioner, the nurse primarily, to buy on contract. So you'll have those lists that Mark was referring to. But then we're starting to see something very similar to you might see on Amazon. You know, people who bought this also liked this. You start getting clinicians or doctors like you who are treating a patient in this condition also used this. You can start creating those kind of networks. And then as we increasingly move healthcare to the home, because we have to get it at the appropriate level, the less expensive, appropriate level of care. So things that used to happen in the acute care setting in the hospital happening now in an ambulatory or outpatient or retail setting, increasingly now even moving to the home. And with the patient, himself or herself, being very, very important in terms of reimbursement. 30% of reimbursement is going to be, in some cases, the score is based on patient satisfaction. You're starting to see retail pharmacies sending notes saying, you know, you're ready to refill your prescription now. You've got nurses communicating with patients after they've left the hospital. Did you check your blood pressure or did you take your meds? Or we're starting to see sensors, you know, whether it's the blood pressure reading or the Fitbit type thing, or I'm even seeing tattoos that go on a pregnant woman that are monitoring the fetus. You start getting those signals that are sending back, and you can be communicating with the patient in terms of, we're reading this, you might need this, did you use this, sending notes back in terms of this patient needs care, or this patient needs this supply, and that starts moving up the supply chain.
It's fascinating, Karen, because I was talking to a retailer the other day about how many prescriptions are never filled, and they've got like 35% opportunity for growth around changing digital paths to purchase for pharmacies, of maybe selling filled pill boxes so that people can get their scripts. So I think we're seeing it in all different ways. We've just got to open our minds. Let's move on to the collaborative economy. So in the collaborative economy, it allows us to share goods, right? And as we deal in the sharing economy, we have the opportunity to change channels, to be able to look at how we share things. So I've seen in the healthcare industry where we've started sharing various expensive equipment and using cloud-based technologies to allow us to look at imaging across distance. Or I was talking to an agricultural company yesterday about the collaborative economy, and perhaps we can share seeders or we can share implements that go on tractors. And so as we look at the collaborative economy, we're getting an economic model where we have shared ownership between people and startups and corporations. And we have the evolution of platforms like this one for GoBarnacle, which allows you to say, I'm shipping, so perhaps I have a box that needs to go to my daughter, or I have a chair that I want to send to my farm. And you've got somebody that may have a van or a truck, and they say that they're driving, and it allows them to use an asset that might not be used otherwise. And so we're seeing people with collaborative economy scenarios into the more traditional supply chain, like perhaps using your garage for storage for an event or your basement. But we also see 3D printing and the evolution of not just small items with 3D printers, but also perhaps the specialized chocolate. And I know, Karen, you were on a panel at our global conference last year where we had a speaker from Arizona State University who pulled a baby heart out of his pocket and said, we're 5 years away from being able to print organs. And I talked about how people are in lists today and we can't get hearts for young children. And, I know, Carol, you've been working at Logitech on, custom earbuds for the ultimate ear. And, as we think about 3D printing, I think that it offers just a wealth of opportunities to change the supply chain, particularly the long tail of the supply chain. Carol, you want to comment on the use of 3D printing?
So 3D printing for us has been quite a boon. We really have enjoyed being able to embrace this technology. For those that don't know, Ultimate Ears is a Logitech division that started out of actually the rock and roll industry. It was the artists like to have an earbud that actually fits inside their ear. So every ear canal is different. You have to have an audiologist actually do a sculpture of it. And then it would go back to some craftsmen, and they would toil away at carving out the perfect earbud, and then the electronics are inside of that, somewhat like an in-ear hearing aid. So at any rate, there are a number of people that are audiophiles. The numbers are growing who really enjoy good music, and they aspire to look like rock stars too. So they like this idea of being able to get a custom earbud. The problem for us was we were pretty limited. It's a craft. You could only make them so fast. What 3D printing did for us is it allowed us to really expand our market. So if we can get an audiologist to take a sculpture, it can be read into a 3D printer, and we can develop the form that we put the electronics in much more quickly with just as much precision and with predictability that we actually don't have when we do them one by one. So it's been a real boon for us. It's allowed us to reach out to consumers that would have been locked out of the market either because of access or because of cost. It doesn't necessarily make things less expensive, but the ability to be able to turn product quickly has really come along with being able to produce through CAD design instead of having individual craftsmen having to sculpt each one. So it's opened up a product line for us that would have stayed very small.
And Carol, how did that happen? Because you were very early in the use of 3D printing. How did that happen?
I think that is part of our company culture. We like gadgets. So there are people walking around the building all day long with stuff they found on the internet or stuff that some guy recommended, down the street. So there's a natural fascination within our company of how do we do something that'll take us further, faster. And so we play around with a lot of things. We make a lot of mistakes. We've tried lots of different gadgety type things that we've abandoned. But in this case, the desire to just figure out how it would work and try and decide does it apply to the business was a good risk, and it's paid off.
Now, Karen, you were on the panel when this was pulled out of his pocket, and he talked about, cells and building tumors that could test custom drugs and building of organs. And we also talked about how 3D printing can change the medical device industry. What are your thoughts here as it pertains to healthcare?
I think it's tremendously exciting because it really does change the nature of the conversation. This professor also pulled out a prototype hip out of his pocket. And I think if you start thinking about how manual right now the supply chain is related to products that are brought into the OR, I'm thinking of like orthopedic products, or into the cath lab, thinking about pacemakers, defibrillators, cardiac stents. In many cases, this is product that's being hand-carried in by the manufacturer's representative, and oftentimes they don't even know what kind of product might need to be used. And if you start thinking about these products being developed on site, specific to the need of a particular patient, it just changes the whole conversation. Right now we're in quite a debate, and a lot of manufacturers under the gun right now to comply with an FDA rule, unique device identification, where they basically have to put a barcode on their label of their products, and it's costing a lot of money. And then you have hospitals that aren't even prepared with scanners to read the barcode. Many people may not know, but as a good friend of mine says, if there's a recall in a hospital, you better hope it's peanut butter, because we can track the peanut butter with the barcode better than we can on that implant that's implanted in a patient who has left that facility. So we're struggling over this kind of compliance, and when we start producing product on demand for a patient on site, it really just changes the whole nature, as I said, of the conversation.
Well, and it may leapfrog. I was listening to Stryker the other day talk about how it took 5 years for them to adapt to the GS1 standards. And if we could print the GS1 standards for medical device 3D printing, and we could get rid of the trunk stuff, I think it could dramatically change the whole medical device industry. But it requires that mindset.
And it's interesting, too. I had an opportunity to speak at the inaugural Internet of Things Global Forum last year and was looking at, well, how do you put a unique device identifier? And there actually is something, I think it's called an InfoStruct, but it's actually imaged into the implant itself. So it's not a label, but there is a way to uniquely identify it.
Which I think is so exciting that maybe that is a way that we can get over some of the UDI legislation. Well, let's continue, because, we've also got digital manufacturing, and we've got the opportunity to redefine maintenance. So, one of the things that I think is really a wonderful opportunity is if we think about all the pumps and motors and valves that are sitting in our factories, and all of the equipment in the process industry that we've put programmable logic controllers on, but yet it sits there, and we still are doing maintenance based upon mean time failure. I think that we're ready, employees, to redefine the manufacturing execution layer in our factories to really improve return on invested capital, to be much more effective in the process industry, to be able to use sensor technologies and improve maintenance. Mark, any thoughts here?
Well, I think this is an area where pretty soon it's going to be table stakes. The leaders, at least in the industries that I've been working in, either are or already have implemented different kinds of sensors and analytics to be able to track the most important equipment and the most important processes in their facilities, not just for maintenance purposes, but also to try to identify repeated events or activities and then take proactive action on those to improve throughput and quality and all those aspects. And I think, what this does is it bridges the gap between what we used to do with our eyes and gives us the ability to see things much earlier because the degree of change is imperceptible to the eye but is acutely visible in terms of the data that's coming back from the sensors. So it's really pretty straightforward. One of the comments I did want to make, though, that I think is really interesting, I really enjoyed hearing about the 3D printing. The 3D printing also, in our industry at least, is a huge, can create huge reductions to time to market for new products. The ability to do prototypes and mock-ups and trial and error in product development, particularly in packaging, but also in the core products themselves, can shave drastic amounts of time off of the time to get a new product into the hands of a consumer.
Awesome. Thank you. So our last topic is, how do we wrap this up? What are these processes that excite you? Mark, as you think about it, what do you think drives the most excitement here?
Well, I think I would answer it on two levels. It's a little hard to answer broadly. The first level is, I think what's really exciting about this is that it's hitting virtually every piece of every business. So we're taking what used to be discrete functional improvements and starting to look at it truly as a chain for the first time and thinking about everything from product development all the way through to end user support of whatever that product or service might be. And that's why I keep going back to this mobile and this interconnectedness being the core thread, and just to me makes it limitless. I know it's a pretty broad answer, but that's how it feels.
Well, but Mark, I think that's really important. We've talked about alignment for a long time, but like Carol talked about and you talked about, it's a reason to have cross-functional teams work together more closely, right? Whether it's 3D printing and the early design release or printing labels on the product as they're made or mobile in the field, I think it helps us to break down barriers.
I think it does, and I think it comes back to, we used to always talk about customer relationship management being at the front end of the process or the back end, depending on how you looked at it. And I think what it does is it starts to move customer relationship management into the center of the process, because everything you do can be related to your customer and can be tied to your customer, and not just at a customer segmentation level, but all the way down in many, many cases to the specific individual customer. And that's when you could do things that you never could do before.
Mm-hmm. Karen, quickly, how about the medical device supply chain? If you were going to take a magic wand and use these technologies, what would you do to redesign that medical device supply chain?
Well, I think one of the opportunities is if we can share information, if we can bring the different types of functions and different kinds of organizations together. So, one of the things that I'm seeing right now is again, I keep talking about the conversation changing. In healthcare, we all know we've got to take costs out of the system, and most of the discussion has been, okay, whose margin's going to suffer? Is it going to be the hospital? Is it going to be the doctor? Is it going to be the medical device company? And I'm seeing more and more organizations. I was presenting with a major healthcare system and a major manufacturer the other day, and they were saying, you know what, we've got so much waste because of manual processes that if we can start sharing information, if we can get demand signals, if we can capture data on the products that we're using in patient care and sharing that information, we've estimated there's $5 billion+ in waste in the U.S. alone. So that's the first place to start. But then I think in terms of waving the magic wand, I see supply chain, which literally has been seen as a department, oftentimes in the basement next to the morgue in the hospitals, elevating that stature, and it becomes that piece of the puzzle, whether it's on the buying side, the user side, or on the manufacturer side. It's the one discipline that touches the clinical area, the financial area. It touches cost, quality, and outcomes, and it can bring these very siloed organizations together to start looking at what truly is being used in patient care, what's driving down costs, what's improving quality, and how can we look at those processes and that sharing of information. We can take cost out without at all negatively impacting either access or quality of care.
Carol, how about high tech? Any insights about the adoption that you'd bring?
Yeah, I think in addition to the other panelists' comments, for high tech in particular, it's shortening our cycle times of product life cycle. So we are moving through products faster. As soon as we have feedback, we're incorporating the feedback from the consumer and pushing it all the way back into the design of the next round of product. So those cycles are getting faster and faster on a lot of our products. The other thing is it's introduced a level of precision that wasn't there before, and whether it's cost or time or any of the metrics that we chase, we could only get so close to understanding what was driving the number. This is bringing in some precision that has been long needed, and it's allowing us to be much more exact in the way that we execute and in the results that we get.
I love the comment around precision because, as we look at the evolution of supply chain excellence, supply chains are 30 years old, and we started out saying we wanted to make a really efficient supply chain, and we focused at cost and procure to pay, and then we said we wanted to make a reliable supply chain, and we wanted to balance costs with the right product, the right place at the right time, and then we built business networks, and we looked at the design of the supply chain to be more resilient. And when I was at AMR, I did a lot of writing around the adaptive or demand-driven supply chain to sense and translate demand. But one of the things I think the digital supply chain allows us to do is really build different forms of horizontal connectors that are shorter in cycles, more precise, allow us to align through mobility and the sharing of data. And I'm real excited about the ability for testing and learning so we can do ongoing testing, whether it's wearables with insulin patients or whether it's test and learning in the stores. But we can have a true customer-centric supply chain, and we can orchestrate market to market, and we can look at cycles, and we can look at what's happening in variation with much shorter latency and learning supply chains. So I'm very excited about the digital supply chain. I just think it really requires a different mindset. And Mark, when you think about the processes and technologies, and you were at Del Monte, you were not early in the evolution of MRP, right? Or you just kind of did it and stabilized it. As a CIO, which of these processes do you think allow people to leapfrog to the next level, and what do you think it means for the existing technology?
I think the big opportunity is in, productive demand shaping. I think there's still very few companies that are productive at it. Everyone's trying to do it, but I don't think it's usually successful yet. And I think what the complementary piece to that is in supply chain compression. Less steps, less rework, less forecasting, frankly, trying to predict the future as much as being adaptable and flexible to meet the future. And so when I think about this, I think about it being more about understanding that consumer, being at the front end, and then architecting a supply chain that can dance with that front end. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, in my mind, ERP in the traditional sense remains the enemy. I think in majority of industries, everybody has spent a huge amount of effort on ERP. You mentioned, MRP, but ERP on a bigger scale, and it's at times an albatross. and it locks you in. It's handcuffs.
And doesn't let us dance with that front end. Carol,
That's
how about
right.
you? Technologies for leapfrog?
So for us, there's a couple things going on. One is visibility. So, and it's not through ERP. It's through other systems that allow us to get closer to the signals we think we need to see. I have to say, we're still trying to figure out which signals those are. So yeah. the quality of data and the timeliness of it is starting to impact us. So I think we're starting to look in the right place, because we're starting to feel that there's a need to know more, and that we can use what we're finding. But this idea of visibility and understanding end to end what the dependencies are and what the opportunities are to influence at the right time, so that you can get a better outcome for your consumer and for the company itself, is a huge emphasis for us. And there's a lot of enablers that come with mobility and cloud and unstructured data that weren't out there before. So we're trying to figure out how do we get our arms around it, and what are the right tools to use, so that we don't get too many signals that are conflicting, or we know what to do with conflict. So it's kind of growing in a lot of different places, supply chain probably being the primary one for us at this point. But that's a huge opportunity for us, is getting our arms around it in a way that it's more manageable than it is today. And as Mark said, it's not through ERP. ERP is not a decision-making system. So we're looking at decision-making systems. We think that the information that's out there is valid and important to us if we can handle it quickly and we're sure of the quality of the data. And then the other thing is with the innovations that have come with things like 3D printing, it's how fast can we get to market and cut time out. We have a vital interest in making sure that we're following the right trends quickly. The window of opportunity to get on shelf and to really impact a consumer is, in our line of products, shorter every day. So that's a huge emphasis, is how do we become much more a part of making sure that we're satisfying the consumer's need real time.
So Karen, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I think in many cases, healthcare, being very risk averse, has oftentimes been a laggard in some of new technologies, new processes. I'm very proud to say, in terms of areas around B2B networks, and particularly around for efficiency, the supply chain has been highly automated, many to many. You know, we've got suppliers, many suppliers on the GHX network who are doing 80% plus of their purchases. Their orders are coming in electronically, and we're automating many, many different processes around that. But it's still seen very much as for the purposes of efficiency, productivity, labor savings, et cetera, where the real opportunity, and I think the other panelists have said this, is in terms of visibility. Because while we have gotten good visibility into what we're buying and what quantity, from whom, at what price, we've not done necessarily a good job looking at what products are being used, to what cost, what total cost, and to what outcomes. I'll often tell government agencies, whether it's the FDA or the Office of the National Coordinator, go to the supply chain. They have to be capturing the data on the products that are being used. Capture it once, read it many times for different purposes, whether it's for billing, whether it's for comparative effectiveness, or whether it's for supply chain. And then I think all of this data, if we start bringing the various parties and various purposes together, we start looking at demand, and not just product demand, but I'm looking at if we can get insights into product demand, clinician demand, facility demand and availability, what does the patient need, where does the patient, you start matching this, and I think we can create a much more efficient and much more effective healthcare system.
Well, thanks very much to my panelists. I want to urge others to think about not what the supply chain is today, but what it can be. Only 11% of the people that joined us today have a digital strategy. And for those of you who are looking for more insight, I encourage you to join us at our conference, Global Summit, on September 10th and 11th. It will be held in Scottsdale, Arizona at the Phoenician, and it is a way that supply chain leaders can imagine not what the supply chain is today, but what the supply chain of the future can look like with mobility, cloud, 3D printing, the ability to redesign for the collaborative economy, the ability to look at Internet of Things differently, and to change the physics and to change the atoms of the supply chain. In addition, we do have a public training class coming up in Philadelphia in August if you want to retool and rethink about technologies and the potential of the supply chain. And always join us on our podcast series. We just posted our 95th podcast, which is available on Stitcher and iTunes, which allows you to connect directly with supply chain leaders like today. And as always, we thank you for joining our supply chain webinar series. We do make the slides available online, and we also will share the link with people so that they can jumpstart their supply chain processes to think digitally. Hopefully the next time we do a webinar, it'll be more than 11% that have a digital strategy. Many thanks to my panel, and have a great day.